First, I want to thank you all for coming here today. Dr. Paul Lucas, Department of Criminal Justice. And let me ask you first, how many of you are familiar with what a drug court is, or have heard about it? I'm hoping my CJ students at least somewhat familiar. So it's titled Drug Courts, A New Way Forward. By no means are drug courts a new idea. And we'll talk about the brief history of them when we, once we get through addiction and what it means and maybe some causations of addiction. But they were developed in the 1980s. So while this is titled Drug Courts, A New Way Forward, it is titled such because it may be a new idea to some of you. And I hope that even those of you that do have some type of understanding of what a drug court is and how one maybe operates, you will still have a much better understanding of what they intend to do and their impact, what we know through research. And I'll give you a brief background. I was familiar with drug courts when I was coming out of my master's program. And when I was working in the field, I was very privileged to come in contact with many problem-solving courts. So I was a liaison for drug court, mental health court, veterans court, drug court, sexual offender court. There's many, many different types of problem-solving courts that exist out there. And although you can read about it in a textbook and really see this new way of doing justice and how it works, I was truly amazed working within these courts, seeing the impact that they had on the individual participants and offenders within the court, and really broadened my, I guess, personal as well as professional sphere of what I thought justice was possible of and how we could attain that, and certainly with certain types of offenders. And eventually, when I went on to pursue my PhD, this is now one of my research interests in areas of expertise or problem-solving courts, namely veterans courts right now. That's what got me involved. So again, not really a new way forward, but maybe a new way for some of you in your thinking today. So I want to ask you, who are addicts? When we think of a drug addict, who are they? Anyone? This could be anyone. Is that the typical societal view?
I guess no. I guess it's my view.
Your view.
Anyone that uses drugs, that overuse.
Overuses drugs, right? So a clinical definition, someone who is abusing a substance. And excellent that it could be anyone. And I would expect that from an educated group of college students or practitioners. Does typical society say, oh, it's anyone? When John and Jane Q. Public are at home watching the news, they say, oh, drug addict or somebody who's abusing substances committed X, Y, or Z. Do they have that same sense? What are they typically going to defer to in their thinking?
They're going to probably immediately think of criminals and bad people.
Bad people. And we're going to get to that. And surely criminal, right? The use of illicit substances is a crime. So by definition, you would be a criminal. But we're going to talk more about the morality of that and what we think, and maybe how we apply those things. Of course, here, their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, sisters, friends, and neighbors. One of my early offenders on my caseload was a young man. He was about, I believe at the time, 21 years of age. And we'll talk about forensic interviewing. And I was doing a forensic interview with him at the Allegheny County Jail in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that's the court system that I worked in. And I come in, and he entered the private room off of his pod in his jail orange. And he looked like your typical addict. He had his sleeves rolled up, track marks were visible. Right? Very disheveled, not very well groomed, put together. Hygiene was lacking. So kind of what you would typically conjure up in your head as an addict. I sit down, I start going through it, and the importance of the forensic interview is to get the individual characteristics, background, and criminogenic factors. And this will make more sense when we get into drug courts and what we do and what they do. So I quickly found out as I'm going through his file, and I'm looking at, we use the DSM-4, right now they use the DSM-5. I'm looking at his GAF scores, extraordinarily high. I'm looking at his socioeconomic background, very affluential family, right? Very wealthy, from part of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where if you had money or did not have money, you had no place being. So I asked him, how did this start? Get the background. When did you start this? And he used to be a motocross racer. That's what he did. He was sponsored, he was amateur. And one day on the practice track, he lost control, went off the side, and literally, almost literally, broke half his body. Right? He hit a tree that was off the track, and from the center down, his face side of his skull, his rib cage, his arm, his leg, his pelvic bones shattered. Right? He's lucky to be alive, so he was hospitalized. And then had to go through very painful reconstructive surgeries. Right at the end of that, he was almost like Wolverine. Half of his body was literally, he sets off bells and whistles when he goes through the airport security. Right? Very painful physical therapy, getting able to move again. And to help him deal with all of that pain, they pumped him full of Oxycontin daily, which is a very powerful drug. It's literally one molecule short of what heroin is. Upon his release, about 2 years in the hospital, he was released, and he had a script for Oxycontins, and that script ran up. And he started trying to lie, saying, "Oh, the pain is coming back, this phantom pain," to get more prescription drugs. And when the doctors finally caught on to that, he started buying these prescription drugs on the street. That's very expensive, buying Oxycontins and certain prescription drugs on the street. They carry a very high price tag. So his family figured this out and stopped giving him money because they knew he was showing addictive behaviors and they were enabling him. So he didn't have as much money, and that's when he moved to heroin. Heroin is very cheap. He started snorting it, and soon that snorting turned to intravenous use, as evident by the track marks on his arms, on his feet. Some of his veins had collapsed long ago. So I really started thinking, wow, we think of these addicts as maybe these bad people, right? Well, he would never have been an addict for sheer chance of a misfortune on his profession, and prescription drugs drew him into that world. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, he was incarcerated in the jail awaiting trial. So I'm not saying that he didn't harm anybody, and I want to make very evident. There are people that deserve to be punished, people that deserve to be in jail and prisons, right? And this is not a get-out-of-jail-free type scenario. But how we address addiction and how our brains function and process addiction, and I hope this becomes clear in the next couple of slides. I think we can do a much better job by educating and then, of course, incorporating some of the treatment that we have available. So any of my CJ students here, what are we looking at here? We're looking at age and certain types of offenses.
Age crime curve.
The age crime curve. We can see, and typically this is going to be young males, right? Those biologically, testosterone, aggressiveness, and also socially what society expects us and how society constructs us and expects us to act. But I wanted to highlight that this is an addiction, right? But where does it strike? And we see the majority, and drug abuse here is this blue line, and we can trace this blue line up here. So we're going to see it in the beginning of the teenage years. It's going to peak out around 19 to 25, and then we see this slow decline of drug abuse. We can all agree, and there's many theories, criminological and other, that explain the age crime curve, but we can all agree that your teenage years, your adolescent years are pretty turbulent, right? Whether through peer pressure, what you're experiencing, rebellion, all of these things. So addiction isn't represented by this line, but this is where individuals fall trapped to addiction. And these are the individuals that plateau out. They continue that drug use throughout, and I had individuals on my caseload and within drug court and other courts that were well in their 60s and 70s. How they survived that long, I do not know, with the amount of drugs that they were using. It was almost a miracle. But we can see in the teenage years, this is where it is more than likely your addiction is going to start, or your addictive behaviors are going to start, as opposed also to vagrancy, disorderly conduct, drunkenness, liquor laws, DUI, and gambling. Concerned, of course, with any type of illicit and illegal substance abuse, right? Deviants or criminal. And we're more concerned about the ones that carry through, that aren't doing this momentarily, that will continue doing this because of how the brain operates. So what drives addiction? There's two general schools of thought. And one was touched upon, your name?
Alex.
Alex, but touched upon by Alex, was maybe they're bad people. Morally corrupt, unethical, a typical view of an addict. So what would be the polar opposite of that? And one that we see in the literature, and we certainly see in textbooks and other literature. You're not morally corrupt, you're not unethical, it's criminal, pure criminal.
You're a good person?
You're a good person, maybe you're suffering from a disease,
Yeah.
right? The addict's brain has been chemically hijacked by drugs, leaving no control over a chronic, progressive disease, is one way that we look at it, right? Oh, he or she has no control over this. It's out of control. But there certainly involves a level of free will within substance abuse. Addicts know not to abuse their drugs in front of a police officer. It's not out of control that I'm just going to use it wherever I am, right? So there is a level of control. And the other is that the addict is this selfish criminal with little regard for others. We typically tend, and what I've seen through my studies as well as my time working within numerous courts, including drug court, is that we apply these labels differently to different groups of people. Who are we more likely to apply the first label here? The addict's brain has been chemically hijacked by drugs, leaving no control over chronic progressive disease. That we should maybe help them. Not saying that they're not criminal, not saying that they didn't break the law. Well, certainly, right? Certainly. Wealthy.
Friends and family.
Friends and family. Who are we more likely to use the second one?
Strangers.
People that we don't know. We see this all the time, even with families of the participants within the Allegheny County Drug Court. They would come in and say, listen, my son is not a criminal. He is a good boy. He was straight off the path he needs help. He's not like the rest of the people in this court. He is, if we're talking about addiction. And this is where the punishment spectrum comes in, and with deterrence, and we'll talk about the empirical background of that. That when we start seeing family members and friends and people that we considered loved ones, we will say it's not their fault, they are a victim of circumstance, they got hijacked by this disease, we need to help them, but if it's somebody else, no, they're bad, we need to lock them up, throw away that key. We know that does not work. We'll talk about that momentarily. So let's get into, briefly, neuroscience. And I'm not a neuroscientist, but you need a basic understanding if we're going to be talking about how this maybe is a mixture of free will, certainly, but also biological neuroscientific factors. So this area right here is considered the midbrain. This is very important for many things. Executive function is one of them. But we have the VTA, the ventral tegmental area. There is a lot of dopamine here, a lot of it. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter. And through this mesolimbic pathway, this is the largest pathway to the nuclei accumbens, right? Whenever an addict uses a drug, it floods dopamine to this nuclei accumbens. What does that do? What effect does that have on your body? That is what we derive reward, what we derive pleasure and motivation from. So similar to, let me use this example that was used in the article that I chose to base this, somewhat of this presentation on. This interaction here through the midbrain between the VTA and the nuclei accumbens is why you are more likely to remember your first crush or your first boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other from the 3rd or 4th grade than you are to remember what you learned in social studies that year. Because it was a rewarding, personal association, right? And maybe that breakup, and these memories very much stick with us, and they're more powerful because we derive this dopamine, and our bodies enjoy pleasure, right? So we start making this connection. So when you, a drug addict, example I used earlier, started getting Oxycontins. Now, not only did that curb the pain, severe pain that he was in, his body was also deriving a lot of pleasure from that, from these dopamine neurotransmitters traveling through the mesolimbic system. And he started encoding memories. This is how our memories are encoded, good memories and bad memories. And you're more than likely to remember and see pleasure off of good memories that we have and not the bad memories. So this goes into your brain almost being hijacked, because now you are formulating memories based off of your addiction. Nobody wants to be that addict that is panhandling, veins collapsing. No one intends to end up there. But through the addiction, surely we know that while this is destroying my body, this is not good for me, this is why I continue to seek this drug. in any way, shape, or form that I can get it, and of course can lead into criminal offending. So if we're encoding these memories, right, and they're so powerful within addiction and other ways, and this, there's a lot about the brain we think we know, we're not 100%. So this is what neuroscientists believe is happening. There's much about the brain that we have a general understanding, but the minute details we don't. So we believe that this is the response of addiction and why addiction is so hard to kill. So interestingly, we can look at addiction as a learning problem, a learning disorder. Now, you have learned something that isn't right, it isn't legal, right? But your brain is encoding it in that manner. And this is important. Think of other learning disorders. Dyslexia. It's a learning disorder. Can we punish dyslexia out of somebody? By continual punishment, if that's a learning disorder? No, we can't. So if this is truly a learning disorder or approaching one through our brain's physiological reaction to addiction and the dopamine and the neurotransmitters, we're learning, and learning, which drives urges like love, comfort, affection, it determines what matters most to you. This is why we see addicts moving away and they isolate themselves from their family, their friends, those who truly care and are trying to help them, because that's not what matters most to them anymore, physiologically, addictively. And this can change over time. This is very different from learning dry facts, making the connection or addiction very much more powerful. Again, not just learning something, we're also reinforcing it. Every time I get that drug in my system, and my body expects that to function normally now, that pleasure in what my brain physiological reaction is to addiction. This can change over time, maybe with a mixture of punishment and rewards, and we'll talk about that momentarily. Research indicates that harsh punitive sanctions do not have the intended impact. And we can agree, we're a pretty retributive society. We can see that in our TV shows and our movies. It's always about revenge, right? We love revenge films, getting that get back. We see harsh punishments rule the day. Again, some people deserve extraordinarily harsh punishments. They deserve to be removed from society. But what is the intended impact on somebody who's an addict that maybe did harm somebody or burglarized the house to feed that addiction, or simply was caught with some, heroin on them? And we punish them through formal sanctions through the criminal justice system. What is the intended impact? This is a nice, easy question. What is the intended impact of that punishment?
Stop them from what they're doing.
And that-
Stop them from doing drugs, stop them from-
And that is deterrence theory,
Yeah.
right? That by my personal experience, I'm not going to do this again because I experienced a severely negative, I lost freedoms. I'm separated, I'm in a place that is not very friendly or that you would like to find and wake up in, such as a correctional institution. We also see this, we think it has the intended impact of vicarious experiences. That I now see this individual who used drugs and who was an addict that got punished very, very severely, that's going to stop me from doing that because I do not want to be punished severely. Research indicates deterrence doesn't work like that because the majority of people don't believe they're going to get caught in the first place, which completely removes that aspect of deterrence. And just earlier this week, they came out with, within criminal justice reform, which is occurring in many places across the United States, very important work. They looked at all these sentencing outcomes. And within this, they found that these long-term 10, 15-year sentences are actually counterproductive, that we're seeing more recidivism at the tail end. When these individuals get out of incarceration, they are more likely to recidivate than somebody, a low-level offender, low-level drug abuser, who was given a drug court or a lighter sentence with rehabilitation through restorative justice. This is because within these courts and with rehabilitative treatment programs, we're empowering and empathetic treatments such as cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and motivational enhancement therapy, and they're more effective. We're empowering and we're teaching someone how to learn again, learn pro-social, not antisocial behaviors, through reflection of saying empathy of who did you harm, not only yourself, but look what you're doing to your family, your loved ones, and relearning them. So it's interesting when we look at the majority of our correctional population, a large number of them are low-level drug offenders. Not these horrible, heinous, violent criminals. Surely they find their way to prison, and they deserve to be there. But the large majority are low-level drug offenders. This was as a result of many things, and we'll talk about these. We can't punish this down, and we're actually going to be counterproductive if we try to approach it that way. So before I get into problem-solving courts, kind of this general history within our court structure and how they do justice differently, and then their interactions and how they work internally and some of the outcomes that we know that they produce. Just for general knowledge, this is something that was pounded in my head when I was working within the court system. There's been a push to move away from the term specialty courts. Right? If we say, oh, these are specialty courts, some of your textbooks will still label them specialty courts. We call them problem-solving courts. If we call a court specialty courts, now we have issues with due process. That these offenders are more special than another offender. Due process does not work that way. Also with entitlement, what entitles these offenders, these drug abusers, to these courts over maybe another one that did not meet the admission criteria? So just for your own knowledge, and we see this, we used to have specialty courts divisions, we took all those signs down and put up problem-solving courts just to get around that problem. And as I said, they include a variety of different models. We have drug courts I'm talking about here today, mental health courts, veterans treatment courts, domestic violence courts. Drug courts were the first one. And all of these other courts, there's many, many, many more, were labeled off of the drug court model. Mental health court, obviously you have a mental health diagnosis. Usually we see co-occurring happening here, so not only are you mentally ill, but you're also abusing substances, more than likely to self-medicate, which is very, very extraordinarily hard to not only take care of the substance abuse problem, but also the underlying mental illness. Veterans courts for veterans coming back and becoming involved in the criminal justice system, especially after OIF, and Operation New Dawn, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Domestic violence courts that take a more restorative justice look, but they're all structured off of the tenets and in processes of the successful drug court model that we're really going to be digging in here today. We can look at this as a different way of doing justice. We are not circumnavigating what we think justice is. We are just doing it in a different way than what we're used to, what you're used to seeing on your TV screens when you turn on and watch Law and Order or something, which, as any CJ student knows, we try to beat that out of your head here, right? Because that is usually largely inaccurate to what the CJ system is and what we know about crime and those who commit it and those who don't. It's a different way of doing justice. So what is the current way? We have an adversarial system. I like to equate it to a boxing match. It's the famous one with when Mike Tyson bit off part of Vander Holyfield's ear, and we have Judge Lane Mills here in the middle. The prosecution and defense match wit over procedure to uncover the truth. That's why jury trials are important, although upwards of less than 8% of all court outcomes aren't jury trials, they're plea bargains. So, discussion for a different time. Are we actually really instituting justice here? The judge is there as the overseer of the match, the trial, to make sure protocols and procedures are being followed. So we're going to equate this to two boxers, and they're duking it out. I'm presenting evidence, you're presenting yours. I'm trying to dissuade the jury against you and more on my side and vice versa. The judge is sitting there making sure all constitutional rights, due process rights, all these things are being followed so as to avoid any type of mistrial or appeals process after the trial. In matching this wit, this is when the truth is supposed to come out. The truth will rise to the top. The jury will see that if it's a judge trial. The judge will see that. And then an honest, truthful verdict will be met. Offenders and those who are guilty will be punished. The innocent will be set free. I like to call problem-solving courts the adversarial alternative. This is an alternative to our adversarial nature and what we're doing right now. Problem-solving courts use two things: therapeutic jurisprudence and effective intervention. Therapeutic jurisprudence is using judicial leverage to encourage treatment. So when you come into one of these courts, you might be looking at, in a traditional criminal court trial, 2 to 5 years incarceration. That doesn't go away. We're going to use that as if you fail in this court, that is what's going to be enacted against you. Judicial leverage, very powerful, even learning at a young age. And then mix that with effective intervention, which is individualizing treatment to the needs of the participants. This is not a one-size-fits-all model, which our typical adversarial court system is. We need to individualize. Something that is happening in your life may be completely different from mine. We have different backgrounds, different issues that through the forensic interviewing and talking with these offenders, we can figure out, effectively intervene, and using therapeutic jurisprudence, encourage treatment to become productive members of society. Judges speak directly to them. Who? The participants in the court, the offenders, not their defense attorneys. It's individualized and something that I've never seen before, especially on TV. Every single day, Monday was drug court day, all day. And you call somebody up, Paul, come up here, you're up. I do stand up there, and you'd have the same defense attorney and same assistant district attorney in each court proceeding. And judge would go, Paul, what's going on? Heard you weren't going to treatment. I am now having direct contact with the judge and many other court actors that I'm responsible to reporting to. This is largely important with empowering and individualizing this attention and treatment. The entire treatment team provides input prior to and during court. And this was very interesting, and I enjoyed this some days. Some days it was a little bit more difficult. The entire treatment team would meet anywhere from 7 to 7:30 in the morning for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. We'd go over every single participant that was on the court docket that day. Are they doing good? Are they doing bad? Are they showing they're not doing anything bad, but they're not really progressing? And we would orchestrate a dance. Who is going to drop the hammer on these individuals? Someone's got to step up here. Should it come from the judge? No. You know what? Today it's going to come from the district attorney's office. Maybe probation. Who's going to empower them? Who's going to build them back up and tell them what they need to do to get back on track? So each individual that came up all day, we sometimes didn't get out of there until about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, sometimes later. Individualized treatment plans, individualized approaches, and direct contact with that court. This isn't a one and done deal. You don't go to court one time, drug court, and you're let out. You can consecutively come back. We'll discuss that. Individualized treatment plans for each participant, tailored to their individual needs. Background and criminogenic factors. Are there abuse factors? Are there social environmental factors? What biological, physiological factors are at work here with the addiction? And each person is very different. And we cannot approach each addict or each offender the same way because surely, as human nature will tell us, we're very, very different. We do things on the spur. We don't all fit in these typologies in these nice little boxes. As I said, it's very important that solutions to complex problems should not follow a one-size-fits-all model. Very rarely will that work, although it may work sometimes, a large majority of the time. It will not work. So drug courts were developed in the 1980s. What was really what began in the 1980s, we still see it today, had a giant impact on our court dockets. Colin, you just said it. What was it?
War on drugs.
The war on drugs. We weren't arresting kingpins, right? These Medellin and these cartels outside of the United States. We were arresting low-level drug offenders, and we assumed, through deterrence, if we can hit these neighborhoods hard enough and arrest enough of these individuals and lock them up, not only would they be deterred from future offending, there would be less drug dealing and less addicts as a result. I have not, and largely in the criminological and in social scientific literature, the war on drugs has not had that consequence. It has not had that intended impact. So judges see this influx of not only their court dockets growing, of all of these drug offenders coming in. They start sentencing them, and then they start seeing them again. And then they see them again. This recidivism. Judges are starting to think something's going on here. Then we started seeing generationally. Now it's not even mom and dad. Now we're seeing sons and daughters. Something has to be done. And what's very interesting is that drug court began as a grassroots movement. This wasn't the criminal justice system going up. We have a problem here. We need to fix it. This was one court in Broward County, Florida, that decided to do things this way. And right now, every single state in the United States has at least one drug court. Usually they have multiple drug courts to deal with the influx of drug offenders coming in. So something that started by one court, one judge, one court treatment team, spread to the entire United States because of, not it was just a good idea and it looks good on paper, because it shows that it works. The admission criteria for drug court. First and foremost, you need victim consent. You need the consent of anybody who was harmed by this individual to say, yes, we want them to be involved in this drug court. We give you our consent. If we don't get victim consent, it doesn't matter about anything else. They do not get put into the drug court. The law enforcement officer will give, the arresting officer will give consent if it is a victimless crime. I get picked up, and I have drugs on me, right? The victimless crime, it's arguable. It's a term that we use, but it's arguable. Law enforcement would have to give consent. Yes, we'll agree to him going to drug court. When I first started working, I had to seek out sometimes victim consent or law enforcement consent, and I thought this was going to be extraordinarily difficult. That I was going to be met with anger, say, no, what do you mean? We're going to let the, no, I want this person punished and put in jail. But once I explained what these drug courts do and how we operate, they were more than willing and more than happy to have these offenders put in drug court. Because they go, yeah, not only is this not a free ride, we can fix this problem. We can prevent somebody else from being harmed, and also that individual harming him or herself. We also need district attorney consent. Underlying substance abuse issue has to be present. No marijuana. If somebody gets picked up for selling, we'll talk about drug dealers. If somebody gets picked up abusing marijuana or smoking marijuana, it's not sufficient for drug court, and that's just because that is more of a psychological addiction than it is a physiological one. And to this point, you would be hard-pressed to find any drug court that would accept marijuana use as a admission criteria that's appropriate. No drug dealers. We don't want somebody increasing this problem. This is for individuals who are addicted. Drug dealers are in it for the financial motivation, right? They want to make money off of this. Now, that is not to say there are some low-level drug dealers that they sell drugs to feed their own addiction. They're not in it for the money, but if I can sell a little bit of heroin, I have a little bit of heroin to use today, and so on and so forth, those individuals would be taken in on a case-by-case basis. No repeat violent offenders. We wanted to keep violent offenders out of the drug courts. That was mainly for a PR, public relations. You don't need, if somebody extremely violent is in a drug court and they should have been in a 10 to 15 year prison stretch and they hurt somebody, that's coming back on the judge in the court. And that's going to really hurt all the progress we make with nonviolent and repeat violent offenders. And of course, no sex offenses. Lastly, we needed offender consent. Forensic interviewing, that's what my job was. We'd go in there and ask them some questions. I'm here with the drug court, the veterans court, what have you, and see if this is something they wanted to be involved in. Now, I put an asterisk next to this, and we'll touch base on that here. You would think that out of all of these, the offender consent would be the most likely, and that isn't always the case, and we'll discuss that. We'll come back to that. If accepted into the court, and they plea into drug court, and they have a suspended sentence, so saying, oh, you're looking at 8 to 9 years, we're going to suspend that sentence while you're here. That's that therapeutic jurisprudence. If you mess up and we remove you, that's what you will be sentenced to. The individual offender has to report to the judge, to the assistant district attorney, the defense attorney, probation officer, treatment providers, social workers, and anybody else involved with that individual. This is on a weekly basis, Monday through Sunday. I report to all these individuals, and all these individuals are present in the drug court during days of docket review as well as during the pre-court treatment hearings. So if you slip up anywhere along the line, we will find out about it just because we have so many eyes on you. And this goes into, and I already briefly explained, these pre-court treatment team meetings, in-depth review of each participant, and the game planning for the court session, who will play what role. It was really a fascinating dance. It was orchestrated. It was almost as a play, that we knew how to approach each individual. It wasn't on the whim, and we could do so in a proactive way to effectively intervene in each one, hopefully effectively intervene in each one of their lives. How often do they go to court? You're going to start off weekly. You will be in Allegheny County. You were there every single Monday. No ifs, ands, or buts. You were there unless you were hospitalized or had some other very reasonable excuse. You were expected to be there every single week. This will be changed to bi-weekly. Contact with all of the court treatment team and in the courtroom. We're going to review status checks. We're going to give you a positive, negative, and neutral. These are very important when you're getting phase promotion. You need so many positive reviews consecutively until you get to phase 2 and 3, and then graduation. You're going to be Urine tested every single time you come to court and multiple times per week. Your probation officer is going to administer your analyses throughout the week. Your treatment provider is going to give you your analysis throughout the week. So we're watching, and they're tricky. They know some ways around this. So the more frequently we can do this, the more better we will be at dissuading them and getting them to abide by the treatment team rules and stipulations. We're going to check employment and treatment. Are you going to treatment? But not only are you going to treatment, are you participating in treatment groups? Are you being proactive? Are you showing progress? Are you going to work? Are you at work when you say you're at work? And any other court orders. One of these could be you are not to have any contact with your old girlfriend or boyfriend. That person is still an addict. We've identified them as such. We do not want you having any contact with them. Right? If you do, it's a negative review, and we can adjust to that. And usually we put in no contact orders and make that legally binding. Average time to completion will vary from participant to participant. You will not get out of a drug court less than 2 years. This is 2 years, 24 months of consecutive, very high intensive treatment checks, going to court, responding and listening to what the court treatment team is saying. It's very, very high impact. And we have phases 1, 2, 3. Some courts have 4 and 5. I've never seen any court that had more than 5 phases. And phases go right back into your positive, negative, or neutral review checks. What we want to do is reward positive behavior and have clear punishments that are equally distributed to all participants. We reward positive behavior by you don't have to come to court every single month. Less frequent court visits, less frequent probation visits. We'll give you travel freedom when you're on probation. I would not allow you to leave this county, and if you do, that's a violation. You start doing well here, maybe we'll let you travel to mom's house in Philadelphia, PA to see your family. Maybe we'll let you travel out of state to that wedding that you wanted to go to. There will be alcohol there, and we have faith in you that you'll be able to stay strong. So rewarding this positive behavior. Of course, phased promotion to graduation. There is nothing better than a graduation day in a drug court. When you see some of these individuals standing in there, they have their suits on, they're groomed, they're proud, they're empowered, they're clean. And you think of when I saw them first in the jail, and some of the ways that they looked, disheveled. It was a different person. It was absolutely a different person, different thinking, different life goals. We also need clear punishments. Clear punishments, this isn't willy-nilly, this isn't something that we're going to say, oh, man, for you this, for you that. No. It's going to be very beautiful, equally distributed. Shock incarceration, empirically is shown to work very, very well, and that is short incarceration terms. You come in, you fail your analysis, I'm going to put you in the Allegheny County Jail for 3 days, or maybe a week. Next Monday, you come back in, we'll see how you're doing, we'll let you in. Also, shock incarceration was used also to the benefit of the offender as well as the treatment team. If you absconded, our worry was you're out using and we're going to find you dead somewhere, or you're going to commit another criminal act. So once a warrant was issued through the court, you were found, we would incarcerate you, we knew where you were, we knew you were safe, and that gave us time for someone like me to go back in, do another interview, what happened, what was going on, develop a new treatment plan, bring them back into court, and we start from square one. Sadly, it's it happened numerous times, and of course, it's just part of the process. We found numerous ones of our participants of the court deceased when they absconded. They've been off these drugs for so long, they think they can go back to the typical amount of use that they had, or they've overused, or they get a hot bag of something, and we find them deceased, even when they were doing extraordinarily well, which is very disheartening. More frequent court probation visits, we can step that up, increase treatment requirements, and of course phased demotion, which will extend your time within the drug court. So I had that asterisk next to the offender consent. The last person on the list, he or she had to consent to, yeah, I want to be in this trial. I'll get to this slide. Looking back at everybody you report to, all the court visits, what's expected of you, having to stay a minimum 2 years, all these phases, rewards, clear punishments. Why did some offenders not want to go this route?
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
No, yeah.
Which is not a pleasurable process of detox, and the jail did a good job of helping them do that when they were initially arrested and incarcerated. A lot of my potential drug court participants would say, I want to get out of here with no paper. I only have to do a year county prison or jail sentence. And no paper means I get out, I'm not on probation. I don't have to report to anybody. So I'll do my year in Allegheny County Jail. When I get out, I can go back to my same behaviors. No one's looking at me. I don't have to report to all these people. That's the easy route. We saw that more with young offenders. Right? They still have that umping. We usually see late 20s, 30s, and as you get older, you get tired of the routine of being an addict. You hit rock bottom. That's when you're really amenable to getting help and getting out there. So we try to get them in there. But a lot of offenders said, no, I'll take my sentence now, get out. It's much easier than all of these requirements. Now within that, and I got this a lot from talking with friends and family and people in the general public, what if I told you, and not this educated group here, young scholars, what do you think the typical response is by many people that don't understand drug courts, where you say, we're not going to incarcerate punitively in these large, long prison sentences. Right? We're going to put them in court and treat them, and rehabilitate them. What do you think they equate that to? Think of when you used to play Monopoly.
Get out of jail free.
Get out of jail for free card. What do you mean we're not incarcerating? We need to punish. We're not punishing, we're getting soft on crime. No one wants to be soft on crime, certainly not politicians. That brings the votes in. They want to get you afraid of crime and offenses. But the sheer fact of the matter is, and I'll digress here momentarily, upwards of 95% of all offenders currently incarcerated will come back out into the community. There is no such thing as throwing away the key and locking them up. So if they come out worse than when they went in, we're just delaying the harm to yourself, the community, right? So we're not doing a good job there. Out of all of the stipulations and criteria and how these drug courts operate, do we see this as a get out of jail for free card? Would you agree with this, seeing who they have to report to, how frequently they have to report to? Absolutely not. And nothing drove us more crazy in the drug court is when people would be so, and we saw this especially with victims, they would say, no, this is too easy for them. Then we walk them through the requirements, and they went, oh no, I want them to do that. Because they saw how stringent this is. This is not an easy process, again, which is why graduation days were so fantastic, because you saw these people put literally blood, sweat, and tears into this process. Successfully graduated, extraordinarily hard proof. So what do we find with drug courts? This sounds like a great idea. It looks good on paper, but if it's not having intended effects or an intended impact, it doesn't matter. One, it reduces recidivism. Graduates from drug court are far less likely to recidivate and commit a future crime than those that were equally matched in empirical studies that did not go into drug court. Two, it decreases jail and prison overcrowding. We have this problem. We don't have beds for maybe some offenders that deserve to be there. We're letting people out early to make room for low-level drug offenders in there. This increases jail and prison overcrowding, frees up beds for those individuals who are more deserving of extreme punishment through longer terms of punishment. And really would call Congress, congressional eyes, as well as the general public, by doing this, we save tax dollars. We are not spending as much money on incarceration, and we're not having the social cost that would continue crime within communities, right, by getting these individuals help. So sometimes that is a better route to make, especially when you're dealing with politics. Not only is this good in a number of ways in other areas, but if I can save you money, you're going to have a long line of people saying, if I can tell my constituents I can lower their taxes or save money on this, I'm on board for it. It also lengthens time to reoffense. This is not a magic bullet per se. Those graduates of drug court can and will do recidivate. It lengthens the time to their recidivism. Why is this important? One, research shows that this lengthened time, they're more able to reach out to their social support networks, and even myself, if they were off of my caseload or to the court treatment team, and say, I'm slipping up, I used and I used again, and we can try to get them help, right? lengthening time to reoffense. It gives us time to get back involved, which is very, very important. All three are achieved by enhancing the participant and the offender's quality of life variables, teaching them a new way of thinking, a new way of learning, a new way of adapting, through positive, pro-social quality of life variables. Clean, feel better. I have social networks within family and friends. Those social networks, even with children, it takes years upon years to build those back up. And we help them do that within the drug court. I have good employment, I have steady income, I have good housing, all of these things. And it's so simple, quality of life. If somebody has good quality of life, they're less likely to offend in many different capacities, right? Very simple. This is what we're trying to get to. So while many drug courts will rate their successfulness based off of do they're a graduate recidivate or not, I like to look at quality of life. Because you might be an addict and still living, or clean, but still living underneath a bridge somewhere. That's not quality of life. You're more likely to slip back in to lose that. Some final thoughts I'll share with you here. Albert Einstein actually said this. Significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. I'm not saying that we created addiction, but Americans are the #1 consumer of illegal narcotics in the world. And this is not because somebody is shoving this down our throat and making us use it. We are #1 consumer of illegal narcotics and even prescription narcotics, right? Because we like them. That is the root of the problem that we need to get at. We can't get at that at the same level of thinking of lock them up, throw away the key, we'll solve this. Research shows the opposite happens. And the second quote here, when I was a few years ago conducting some interviews to complement some research that I was doing, I sat down with an assistant district attorney who was aspiring. He was actually going to run to be the district attorney, the head district attorney of Allegheny County in Pennsylvania. And usually you're going to see them, especially when they're campaigning, be extraordinarily tough and punitive on crime. Because that's what the constituents want, even though they don't know the impact and outcomes. He surprised me when he said, I said, where do you see the criminal justice system going? He was involved in drug court and veterans court. He said, you take the individuals who are likely to get themselves back on the right track. You find the problem, cause their behavior, you solve that problem. If you can do that, you reduce the number of individuals in the criminal justice system. This is how the criminal justice system is going to look in the future. Now, short of having one of those jaw-dropping moments coming from an aspiring district attorney, this was amazing because he saw the impact firsthand within the courtroom. And he was bringing this out as he was out talking to people, saying, no, this is how these courts work and how well they can do justice in a different way and how well you'll be off as a community and we'll be better off as a society. Maybe not in my lifetime, and systems, especially the criminal justice system, are very hesitant to change, very deep-rooted. This was reassuring. Maybe with all of these different courts, we will take a more individualized approach to many different crimes and offenses, maybe not all, and certainly not all. But maybe do justice a little bit differently. So with that being said, I hope you learned something here and maybe built upon it and what you did know about drug courts and what they did in addiction a little bit. And I'll open it up to any questions that you have right now. Yes?
What were the graduation rates in, I know, your county that you worked in the drug courts with? Like, I don't know if you know the statistic nationally, but just in your county, what was the graduation?
And I can only speak at the time that I was there, because I haven't looked back up at Allegheny County. The 4 or so years that I was there, consistently, we were in the 80 percentile.
Okay.
Those ones, we did have instances of just people that were not receptive to change and treatment, and they were removed from the court and sentenced. But through flexibility, and that's an important question to note, that just because you are an addict and you're an offender and you're placed in drug court doesn't mean I'm never using a drug again. 100% of them did have slip-ups. They did use again. That's why addiction was that easy to solve. I wouldn't be standing here giving this presentation. But by working with them, we were in the 80 percentile, 85, 86 consistently, which was very reassuring. Of course, we had to go in front, not me, the judge had to go in front of congressional members each year to secure federal funding for our drug court, and that's what they wanted to see. And we were consistently able to show them. Excellent question. Yes?
I'm just in the dark about which states actually do have the drug court. Is it nearby?
We are currently, I'm involved with this process right now, developing one for Ellis County. For Ellis County, I just moved here about a year ago, so I know that the 23rd Judicial District is Ellis, Trigo, Brooks, and there's a fourth one. And it's a process to get them set up, and we are currently, I would say, past the midway point, and it's looking promising. But we're hoping to have one that serves the 23rd Judicial District here in the next year and a half or so.
So where was Allegheny County? What state was Allegheny?
Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Gotcha. All right.
And that was really, I was surprised, not like I said, drug court, mental health court, veterans court, gun court, DUI court, domestic violence court, sex offender court, you name it. They were really shifting to this individualized model because they bought into the process, they saw the positive. Yes?
Where's the funding coming from for drug courts?
There are federal dollars for the first couple of years available. If you can go through the training. And this is through the National Association of Drug Court Professionals and tied in through Congress. But there's money available if you can show that you've set it up in a certain way, following what we call the 10 key commandments of drug court, which essentially were spread all throughout here. So within 3 to 4 years it will be funded, but then you will have to be self-funded. And that is a problem for very rural jurisdictions. You just don't have the funds to be able to run these courts. But there are federal, local, and state dollars out there because they bought into the process again by saying, hey, we can give you this money and you're saving X amount of actual financial costs as well as social and community costs. So it took a while to get to that point, but once many more states and jurisdictions adopted them, we saw the Yes?
I apologize, I'm from Colorado.
No need.
Give me the news. What is the status of that in Colorado?
Drug courts?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's drug courts, there's also, I'm aware of veterans courts that are available there. Certain jurisdictions, I'm aware of more on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains than I am of the, the eastern side than the western side of the Rocky Mountains. I don't have an exact total, but there is a national site out there that you can pull up. You can select Colorado as a state, and it'll list all different types, as well as numbers and locations. Yes?
Forgive me if I missed it, but you said you were going to touch on the morality of drug laws. You know, just questioning that at face value you can do, but especially given the fact that arguably the two most harmful drugs to society are the ones that are legal, and in one case, I would argue, socially encouraged. And to me, that's always been the real problem with why our drug policy doesn't work. It's completely upside down. And kids who try marijuana, for example, and say, okay, and then they go out and they get drunk, and they say, well, gosh, if marijuana is almost nothing, you see what I'm saying? Maybe this other illegal drug is not that bad.
Research shows that the gateway drug argument is not there. That the large majority, in the 90 percentile of those who experimented or tried marijuana or consistent users never move on.
In other words, making marijuana illegal is what makes it a gateway drug, right? For that.
Well, no, it would be the substance, not so much if it was legal or illegal. It would be a gateway drug regardless. The research says that no, it does not act as a gateway drug. Preliminary, so this is why everybody's looking at Colorado very intently. Preliminary results, and they just did a national or a statewide study that marijuana increase, either there was no increase among adolescents within that state at all, or there was actually an increase. So again, until more research is done, and even the governor there came out and said these are preliminary, so we're not getting behind these yet. Because he's looking at it as more of a democratic. Like the state voted this, we're going to go with it, we're going to put all the safeguards we can in place, and we're going to monitor the situation. So as of right now, it doesn't look as if that it's gonna increase other drug problems and drug usage, right? But I would hesitate to say conclusively Colorado and other states have legalized it. We've shown similar findings so far, are very far from conclusive. Another thing that they found were opiate overdoses and emergency room visits for opiate abuse and use has drastically declined within Colorado, which does not make, careful saying this, prescription drug and pharmaceutical companies, that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. You turn on the TV, it'll say, hey, do you have this, and this? We got a pill for that. Go ask your doctor. Instead of going to your doctor saying, hey, I'm feeling this, and this, what do you recommend? Right? So potentially, and we can't say this conclusively, that the legalization of marijuana, and the NFL is actually even looking at this as well for pain management, may be a better and sufficient pain management for chronic pain than the addictive capabilities of some of these prescription drugs and some of the side effects that come out there. When I was touching base on the moral aspect of it, it was more how some in society would look at this as inherently bad people, that you must be, and I hate using this word, you must be evil in some way, or you're morally corrupt. Whereas you see all walks of life. Drug addiction does not discriminate against color of your skin, socioeconomic status, where you were born, where you were raised. If you have a college degree or not, it is prevalent across the board. So the moral
Nobody's
argument,
thoughts about alcohol and tobacco users, they don't think of them as immoral.
because they're legal and they have been for so long.
Well, that goes back to my original point, that by making marijuana illegal, that's what basically turned it into this bad thing that's associated with heroin and speed.
I see what you're saying, absolutely. And essentially too, this is interesting, we create crime, do we not? We can get rid of all crime tomorrow by saying, no, nothing's criminal. Right? All crime is gone, so there is labeling and unintended consequences in the laws that are promoted based off of something being criminal that will enhance other aspects. I see what you're saying, and hopefully I was able to answer that. But certainly, how we label certain drugs will up the crime rate, will increase incarceration, and all types of societal impacts that would have. But absolutely, that could be, it is part of the issue of problem. Not the only, the main part, but certainly part of the network, the system.
I just wanted to comment, I do feel that it's experimental at this time amongst, how many different states, we all know. It's experimental,
Yeah.
and it could fail. You
Yes.
know, because,
You're talking about drug court?
you cannot possibly
Legalization.
think that, you know, Washington, California, Colorado, that they're, they know everything. That's a big mistake. Every state needs to really keep a handle on what is happening there locally.
And they are watching very intently. And one of encouraging to some, not encouraging to others, was when Colorado, and California is dealing with this right now. They legalized it under that proposition, but they don't know how to institute it. Yeah, they don't know. And that's coming up January 1st. Colorado, so they had a big increase in juveniles, young kids being admitted to the ER for ingestion of edibles. They made gummy bears, little chocolates. So we saw this, I say we, it's generalized, saw this intake of children in ER rooms. So the response that Colorado took was child-proofing packages, right? Similar to putting stickers and things on bleach around the house, if you don't touch these things. That's what they started instituting. So it wasn't a knee-jerk reaction of saying, oh, we failed, we can't let this happen. They're trying to control best that they can. And even with the elections last evening, the winner of the election in New Jersey, he promised that if he is elected, he will sign a recreational legalized marijuana bill as soon as it hits his desk. So we might see now in the Northeast now, Maine has been trying to do it for some time, but it keeps getting vetoed. New Jersey might be the next state added to that list in this experiment. And that's exactly how we should look at it, as an experiment. We just don't know yet. We don't know. Yeah.
You talked about how, like, the cost differences in incarcerating someone versus a drug court. And I was just curious with, like, all the different entities involved, like you have probation officers, social workers, the judges, dockets filling up, and lawyers. How much, like, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, what the difference in cost is in incarcerating someone through putting them through a drug court?
It's gonna vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction, especially from jails and prisons, and there's a big difference. On average, $80,000 to $85,000 to house somebody in a correctional facility per year. And we are the #1 incarcerator in the world right now. So you take the millions of people that we have incarcerated, and at that low number of 80,000 per year, multiply that, the savings roughly of keeping somebody out would be $80,000. Probation officers that are assigned to the court, as well as lawyers and all that, they get paid the same, it's not overtime, that's what they do. That's the only courts that they operate in. So we don't see extra costs going out, and maybe a topic for a different time, but treatment providers, that's a for-profit business, they're more than happy to accept more and more clients in, because that's when insurance eligibility, as well as maybe out of pocket, and that's also a multi-billion-dollar industry, treatment, finding treatment, inpatient and outpatient as well. So maybe not from the insurance standpoint, I don't know those numbers, but on average, the low number of not dealing with health consequences, as security levels go up with correctional facilities, the cost goes up dramatically. Maximum security is very much more expensive than medium and low level, but on average, $80,000 to house somebody that we would save right off the bat by keeping them in the community and getting them into that treatment.
So I was in a class that marijuana is so longer and longer. If that's the case, would you see it as maybe being like an requirement to get into drug court, or?
I would agree with marijuana getting stronger, and that's just through cultivation.
Yeah.
Right, you compare from the 1960s until now, with hydroponics and grow facilities, they can up the strength in as the THC content that provides the high per se. Now, the addictive, there is nothing in the literature that would say that it's increasing in being. Now that use may rise, but I don't foresee marijuana being allowed into drug court. One of that is you're gonna override the docket. There are many people in states where marijuana is not legal. It's the most commonly used drug, right? That it would just be overwhelming, and there are no treatment groups for marijuana. I mean, cognitive behavioral therapy, different ways of thinking. Don't use it, right? In a sense, for better or worse. I'm sure there is some benefit to, there would be some benefit to it, but on that large scale, yes, it's becoming more potent, but I don't see it finding its way into drug court anytime soon.
Is there a certain type of drug user, because I actually had a motorcycle wreck pre-Somerville and broke my ribs, and I was heavily injected with Dilaudid and oxycodone for a week, and then I was on Percocet for 3 months. And when I stopped taking those, my only problem was I had one withdrawal symptom, insomnia, and that was my only motive. I did not want to get high. All I wanted was relief, and as soon as those withdrawal symptoms went away, I had no desire. I still got nothing left in my medicine. It had nothing. It was all trying to escape the withdrawal. So is there a different type? But that wouldn't work in a drug court, right? That type of person.
Well, you were an addict, right? You didn't.
Okay, maybe I'm just. I assumed that I was. I thought it was the appearance of withdrawal symptoms.
No, you can withdraw from. I mean, there's withdrawal symptoms from taking the equipment, right? You got that lightheadedness, and then so withdrawal symptoms aren't indicative of addiction. Addiction is when it starts impacting your daily functioning. Can you wake up in the morning without abusing a drug and get through the day? That is a big sign of addiction. That you need that to function properly throughout the day, or it just overtakes.
Well, I couldn't sleep without it, and during the day I felt pretty normal, unbelievably. I didn't have any problem during the day other than dreading the night.
But you wouldn't be arrested for that. That is a big argument against pharmaceutical drugs.
So it's when you start using them illicitly is when you become an addict. I mean, what is the
I could go out right now, I'm not saying I am. I could go out right now and snort a line of heroin and maybe go through withdrawal symptoms or something. That would make me criminal if I got caught using or with it on my possession. but it wouldn't make you an addict. It may not have the same effect that it has on you. And certainly, you don't have that physiological response to the medication you were on, or somebody else in your family or somebody completely different may have had a completely different physiological response and developed an addiction based on that. So that's, again, the one-size-fits-all model. It's not saying, oh, well, I was on a hard pain medication, I had withdrawal symptoms, but I got off of it, why can't they? It's not that one-size-fits-all. You were one person.
Well, I understand well, but it was incredibly difficult. Really, I mean, I came so close, because I knew if I went and popped a couple of those, I'd sleep like a baby.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, because I read about Rush Limbaugh getting addicted to those, and that's when it really first occurred to me that it's not, you know, the theme of what you're saying here, a guy like, you know, could not addicted to
Yeah, a guy like him, that guy goes into what we think, or who we think addicts are, and who gets addicted. We see it on all levels, and that's why I wanted to use this. This kid wanted nothing in life, right? Money was there, he was successful in his career, and sideline. You see it in all cultures across the world. It's non-discriminatory, right? And I think that's a great example of how we can't look at that as an addict is this person all the time, every time. Where it comes, I saw so many different men and women come through that drug court with so many different backgrounds and so many different issues that it was a really large eye.
But you know, the hospital, it was in Denver Metro, when I got discharged, nobody mentioned one thing to me about withdrawal symptoms. And to me, that was another really enlightening thing, why this problem is so bad, because not only do the doctors get the ones that get you hooked, they don't prepare you for those withdrawal symptoms. Well, here's what you need to do if you have trouble stopping taking it.
Yeah, and you go and pick up a prescription if you had to have a refill. It'll be a nice long part of that prescription, but nobody walks you through all of it. And even it's always, you know, when you see these medications on TV, they go through them really fast, right? They're like, oh, do you have trouble sleeping at night? Take this pill. Side effects may include dry mouth, runny stools, headaches, nausea, dizziness, loss of consciousness, you know, all these things, and they get through them so fast. But you're just thinking, oh, I'm going to solve that problem. You might be creating more problems. And unfortunately, those problems that come from taking that one sleep pill, there's probably another pill out there that'll counteract those problems. And then, you know what I mean? It's very complex in a way, and I agree. You aren't prepared that you get this medication, you go home, you don't know what's in that cabinet. And that's a problem with children as well. They go in that cabinet, they start pulling pills out. We don't know what their response to it could be. They're just giving you for a specific purpose. Sure.
A very simple, is codeine. It's addictive. And that's a standard drug given to your children when they get the tonsils out. So then it's in a pink liquid, tastes delicious.
I can picture the bottle in my mind right now as a
Yeah,
kid.
and I
remember
had a
it.
nurse that she said, I see you have that prescription, and I said, yep, and she knew me personally, we'd gone to school together. She says, I know how you guys are, and I said, I know how you are too. We come from an alcoholic family. And she says that codeine is gonna put your kid into a withdrawal once you stop her taking it. And so she said, I recommend for these tonsils, because I know you. And maybe she was breaking the rules, but she said, just try to do the ibuprofen and rinse it with salt water. She said, because once you give your child, and she was 8 years old, the codeine, that addicts her, because you take it as prescribed, and then she will have, and then the withdrawal symptoms are more painful than the actual sore throat and the tonsil.
Absolutely, and that's important to have a close relationship with your practitioner, PCP, because they can tell you these things, whereas a lot of it's just in and out. Go in there, oh, here's a script, this will take care of it, and then you may go through those withdrawal symptoms. And also, I have addiction in my family as well, and my dad calls it the bug, right? And we know that you are more susceptible to becoming an addict yourself. We are very conscious of that, and growing up and things of that nature. That it's not a problem that it will be easily fixed, and it won't be a problem that will be fixed completely in any of our lifetimes, if not ever.
Oh, is it true, excuse me for interrupting, is it true that methamphetamine is like what we were told when we
different people have different reactions. I'm more, kind of in the, not the same drug, but like cocaine. One person can snort cocaine and never snort it again, where somebody else would have a different physiological need and craving for it. So methamphetamine, there are people that use meth recreationally, if you want to call it that, kind of belittles it, and then don't become addicted to it. They can stop using it. There is no drug that, you know, that purports out, you smoke this one time, you take this one time, you are gone. That's a scare tactic to use.
You got a psychological addiction the first time, right? But most physical addictions take a week to, you know, a prolonged period of use.
Repeated use.
Or a physical addiction.
Yeah, repeated use, absolutely, and that psychological addiction is, it makes me feel good. Right?
Yeah, because there's no evidence that marijuana is physically addictive, right? You don't have withdrawals, you may want to get high really bad, but it's not causing you.
And that's
withdrawals.
with the cognitive behavioral and motivational enhancement therapy, that's more for the physical and psychological. And it doesn't look at the psychological aspects, and that's why you see marijuana not included.
Yeah.
Because there's no real treatment.
This is psychological treatment, right?
Yeah, but you're not gonna have withdrawal symptoms, you're not gonna have cravings.
Right.
You don't see somebody out there, I'm sure it does happen, but you're not gonna see, you know, when someone's binge with heroin. There was a big crime wave that came through my area when I was in Pittsburgh, and it was a heroin ring. And they would go out there, they'd rob cars, sell that, and they would serve their heroin needs. You're not gonna see a marijuana ring of people like, oh man, we need to get high right now, let's go out and rob 30 cars in one night and sell it. And it's not that compulsory, because if I don't have my heroin fix for a day, I have vomiting, I can't move, extraordinary pain and discomfort, sweating, all these things where it's almost, that's what I call it, fix, right? I need to get my fix to fix my symptoms, my physical symptoms, whereas you're not gonna have that with marijuana. Where you might wanna get high, and certainly people would commit crimes to get money to get marijuana or something like that if they saw that fit, but it wouldn't be for that. I'm hurting, or, you know, I have aches and things of that nature. And one of the most horrible things you can ever witness is withdrawal. And even the wing within the jail that I visited frequently, and going in there to see some of the new guys on my caseload, it's terrible. Terrible. And they would just sweat, they gave them no medications in there, you know, addictive or anything, they just let them sweat it out, and monitor the nurses and things.
So most drug users can still.
I would transport an individual from Allegheny County Jail. He might have been in there for a year and a half. I'd transport him to probation parole in his treatment facility, and he would have a hot urine. Drugs are in facilities. Stepped on, they're usually not very good quality or anything. But yeah, he tested numerous times that my guys tested positive for cocaine. You were incarcerated the last 2 years. Where'd you get it from? They're not saying anything.
From Sam?
Yeah. So yeah, that is a problem, both with smuggling that in, through inmates smuggling it in, but also correctional officers. We call it a lawyer, the police call it a lawyer in Allegheny County, taking cocaine in for confidential visits. You get paid handsomely on the outside, and the correctional officers call it onto it. So it gets in there. There's a market for it. Somebody will exploit it. So. Going once. Going twice. Thank you so much for coming.